They say the most terrifying things happen when you're least prepared. A quiet shift at work, a late-night gaming session, or a stranger who keeps showing up when you think no one's watching. But what if the unease you felt wasn't just in your head? What if someone, or something, was already inside? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Night Terror X, your home for stories that crawl under your skin and linger long after the screen fades to black. Tonight's tales unravel in the shadows of everyday life, where a simple night shift turns into a brush with a dangerous secret, where two teens discover they're not alone in the basement, and where a mysterious figure returns night after night with no clear motive, only a silent, watching presence. These aren't just stories, they're warnings, reminders that sometimes the scariest moments don't come from the dark. They come from what's hiding just beyond the light. So if you're brave enough to continue, hit that like button, share your own chilling encounters in the comments, or send your scariest real-life horror stories to this. Your nightmare might just be featured in an upcoming episode. Now dim the lights, keep your eyes on the door behind you, and let's begin. The Man at the Window. A friend of mine, Jake, told me this after we went camping last fall, and I still get chills thinking about it. He said, "This happened just a couple months ago. I was alone that weekend, just enjoying the last bit of winter from the comfort of my couch. It was one of those cold, rainy nights, where the wind howls just enough to make the windows rattle slightly. Jake had spent most of the day indoors, watching movies and heating up leftovers for dinner. It was the kind of weather that makes you feel lucky to be inside. Warm, safe, tucked away from the rest of the world. He told me it was around 9 p.m. when there was a knock at the front door. Not a buzz or a bell, a knock. Firm, measured, but strange given how late it was and the storm rolling through. Curious but cautious, Jake peered through the peephole. A man stood there, mid-40s, scruffy, damp from the rain, wearing a faded brown jacket and holding a snow shovel. But here's the weird part. There hadn't been any snow on the ground for days. Jake cracked the door slightly, just an inch or so, and asked, "Can I help you?" The man started mumbling something about yard work, said he was just offering to help clear driveways or tidy up. Anything he could do for a few bucks. But his words were all over the place, like he was trying too hard to sound casual. Something about his tone, his darting eyes. Jake said it immediately felt wrong, unnatural. He politely declined and began shutting the door, but the man suddenly pressed his hand against it, not pushing hard, but just enough to stop it from closing. They locked eyes for a moment. Jake said it was the way the man looked at him, not angry, not desperate, just calculated. Then just as suddenly, he let go and turned away, vanishing into the fog and rain. Jake stood there for a second, heart racing. Eventually he double-locked the door, peeked through the curtains, and watched as the man walked off down the sidewalk and disappeared into the mist. The whole thing felt off, but he convinced himself it was probably just a drifter moving on to the next house. About an hour later, the rain had picked up. Jake had started another movie, something he figured he wouldn't finish because his eyelids were already getting heavy. He was just starting to drift off when a sudden thump jolted him awake. One loud sound, sharp, dull, but unmistakably above him. He sat still for a moment, listening. The storm outside muffled everything, but it was clear that noise had come from upstairs. Still half asleep and unsure what to expect, Jake slowly made his way up, thinking maybe something had fallen or maybe a pipe shifted from the cold. But he checked every room. Nothing. No leak, no knocked-over lamp. Just silence. Maybe it was the gutters, maybe the wind. He shook it off and headed back downstairs. Awake now, he finished the movie, turned off the TV, and started shutting off lights, one by one. But as he climbed the stairs to go to bed, something changed. He could feel it. The temperature dropped noticeably, like the upstairs air had been sitting with the windows open. It was subtle, but unsettling. He figured maybe the heat hadn't reached that part of the house yet. He walked down the hall and began closing the bedroom doors he had left open earlier, until he reached the guest room. He froze. The window was cracked open, not wide, just slightly ajar, like someone had lifted it from the outside. He said he stared at it for at least 10 seconds, just trying to process how it could be open. He never opened that window. He hadn't even been in that room. Jake stepped closer, staring at the sill, and there, barely visible in the faint glow of a nearby streetlight, was a small wet impression. The shape of a shoe print, just on the edge of the inside ledge. Every instinct screamed at him to get out. He turned, listening intently. The creaks of the old house blended with the patter of rain on the roof, but something in the air felt heavy, like someone else was in there with him. Slowly he backed into the hallway. Every open door around him suddenly felt like a trap, like a pair of eyes could be watching him from any shadow. He made it downstairs, grabbed his phone, and ducked into the garage, locking the door behind him. He didn't scream, didn't panic, just called 911 and waited, counting every second. 5 minutes. That's how long it took for the first officer to arrive, though it felt like hours. Jake let him inside, then stood outside on the porch, soaked in cold fear as the cop moved through the house. 2 minutes later, the officer called out from upstairs. He came down, escorting a man in handcuffs. It was him. The man from earlier, the shovel guy. No jacket now, no beanie. Just drenched socks and a blank, angry expression as he was walked past Jake and shoved into the squad car. The officer later told him that the guy had gotten in through the second-story window. That thump Jake had heard earlier. That was the man landing on the roof before sneaking inside. And most chilling of all, he had been hiding in the master bedroom. The room Jake was just about to enter when he noticed the open window. He'd even taken off his shoes to avoid leaving tracks on the carpet. That barely visible imprint on the window ledge, that was the only sign Jake ever got. The intruder had planned to wait until Jake was asleep. The fact that he didn't make it to the bedroom in time probably saved his life. Jake told me he still can't sleep right some nights. That he checks every window, every lock, every shadow. He said, I keep thinking about how close he was. How he was already in my house. Just waiting. That kind of fear. It doesn't fade, it settles in. And honestly, I can't blame him. The man from nowhere. So I was closing up one night at this dusty little gas station outside of town when my buddy Marcus texted me something that chilled me. You still working nights? You ever seen a guy in a red beater car? Comes in sweating like he ran a marathon. I had to pause for a second. Yeah, I had seen someone like that. Let me back up. A couple years ago, I picked up this temp gig at a 24-hour gas station off the interstate. I was saving up to move cross-country, and the overnight shift worked out since I didn't have much of a social life back then. Most nights were dead silent, just me, the hum of the fridge, and a playlist of depressing midnight radio. Boring, but peaceful. Around my second month, this guy started showing up like clockwork, between 1 and 2 a.m., same time, every time. He drove this rust-colored 90s sedan that sounded like it was coughing up a lung, and he always bought the weirdest stuff. A can of corn, duct tape, 2 energy drinks, and a wrench. Another night, it was laundry detergent, a flashlight, and beef jerky. Nothing ever made sense. He never talked much, just grunted, paid in cash, and left. I only knew his name was supposedly Ray. He told me once in passing, but even then it sounded like he made it up on the spot. Then came that night. It was a Tuesday, slow, cold, and quiet. The kind of night where your own footsteps sound suspicious. Around 1:17 a.m., Ray's junker rolled in. But he didn't stroll in like usual. He ran, shirt clinging to him with sweat, eyes darting, jittery like he'd just escaped something. He beelined for aisle 4 and snatched a heavy-duty combo lock, the kind you'd use to chain up a storage unit or a steel gate. He slammed it on the counter like it owed him money. "Everything okay, Ray?" I asked, trying to play it casual, even though his vibe was way off. "You just pick up a new bike or something?" No eye contact. He fumbled through his wallet, dropped a 20 on the counter, didn't even wait for change, and sprinted out the door. He was gone before the receipt finished printing. I remember staring out into the empty lot, just watching his taillights fade into the dark, thinking. Something was wrong, really wrong. The next few nights, no sign of him. I started to wonder if maybe he'd gotten into some trouble. Maybe drugs, maybe paranoia. But by the following Wednesday, he came back, and everything about him screamed danger. It was raining that night, a slow, cold drizzle that made the whole world look like a wet photograph. Around 1:30 a.m., his car pulled in again, headlights off. He came through the door stiffly, soaked to the bone, and mumbling to himself. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone. It was frantic, like someone arguing with themselves about what to do next. He didn't greet me, just stormed through the aisles like a man on a mission. I stood behind the counter, frozen, pretending to be busy, but really just watching him from the corner of my eye. That's when I heard it. Thud. A sharp, heavy slam from outside, like someone had kicked the inside of a car door, loud enough to make my heart skip. I turned to the window, eyes narrowing at Ray's car. Nothing moved. No one was out there, but something felt off, like I was watching the scene through a fogged-up lens. I looked back toward the aisle, and that's when I saw him. Ray wasn't moving anymore. He was standing at the end of the row, half shrouded in the flickering overhead lights, just staring at me. His eyes were wild, like a cornered animal that realized it had been seen. We locked eyes for maybe 2 seconds, but it felt like a full minute. My stomach dropped. That was the moment I knew something was in his car. Then, without a word, he looked away and bolted out the door, into the night, gone. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone. I snapped a picture of his license plate as he pulled out of the lot, tires screeching against the wet pavement, then called the cops. By the time I got off my shift around 6 in the morning, I'd just started to convince myself maybe I was being dramatic. That's when the police called me back. They'd found the car, and they found something else. A woman, barely alive, chained inside a root cellar behind a rundown cabin at the edge of Pine Hollow Woods, about 20 minutes from the station. Turns out Ray, or whatever his real name was, had been living off-grid out there for weeks. No ID, no credit history. Just a shell of a man who blended in with the night shift world. And he wasn't buying tools, food, and locks for himself. He was preparing to keep someone. The cops told me she'd been missing for days. If I hadn't caught his plate, she might not have made it through the week. The Ray I thought I knew didn't exist. He was a ghost in a borrowed name. I still work nights sometimes, and every time a car rolls in after midnight, I get this flash of memory. Those eyes, that stare, that awful moment of silence before he ran. And sometimes, when the rain starts coming down just right against the glass, I swear I hear that thud again. But this time, I don't look. The hallway light was on. A friend of mine, Sean, told me this story after we were talking about weird stuff that happened when we were younger. He said, "I don't care what anyone says. After that night, I'll never sleep in a basement again." He was 14 when it happened. Spring break had just started, and his parents decided to head out of town for their anniversary. Just a little getaway to a bed and breakfast a couple of hours north. Nothing major. Sean, being the typical teenager, convinced them he was totally responsible enough to stay home alone. And for the most part, he was. But he figured, why not make a night of it? So he invited his best friend, Tyler, over for an all-nighter. Video games, snacks, soda, the whole thing. Tyler showed up with enough junk food to survive a natural disaster, and they headed straight for the basement. That place was their kingdom for the night. Blankets on the couches, PlayStation cranked up, speakers blasting. The hours just melted away in a blur of button mashing and smack talk. Around 11 or so, Tyler said he was heading upstairs to grab a drink. Nothing weird until he came back down. He looked off, pale, unsettled. "What's up?" Sean asked, half focused on the loading screen. "I think someone's outside," Tyler said, "by the kitchen, just standing there." Sean laughed at first, thought it was a joke, like one of those dumb pranks to freak each other out during sleepovers. But Tyler wasn't laughing, so they went upstairs together, quiet, cautious. The kitchen had a big sliding glass door that looked out onto the backyard. At first glance, everything looked normal, no movement, no shadowy figure. But then they saw them, smudges, right at eye level on the outside of the glass, like someone had leaned in, pressing their forehead and hands against the door to peer inside. Sean quickly yanked the blinds shut. The silence that followed was heavier than it should have been. They checked the rest of the windows. Nothing. It was creepy, sure. But after a few minutes of not seeing anything, they chalked it up to maybe someone cutting through yards or some random neighbor being weird. So they went back downstairs and tried to put it out of their heads. Eventually, Tyler crashed on one couch, Sean on the other, lights off. The only sound was the occasional hum of the heater. But Sean, he couldn't fall asleep. Every time he drifted off, he'd wake back up a few minutes later, over and over. He blamed the caffeine at first, but deep down, something just felt wrong. Then on what must have been his 6th or 7th time waking up, something changed. The basement was pitch black, except for a thin sliver of light, barely visible, stretching across the carpet at the top of the stairs. It was coming from the door that led upstairs. Sean sat up, heart already pounding. He glanced over at Tyler, who was still fast asleep. Had Tyler gone up earlier, left the light on? That didn't make sense. Sean had been awake off and on all night. He would have heard him. The door was cracked just enough to let that little beam of light in, like a sliver of something, waiting. Sean stood, his limbs heavy with unease, and crept toward the stairs. At the top, he gently pushed the door open further. The hallway light was on. So was the one in the kitchen. Every instinct was telling him to go back. But curiosity or maybe fear, pulled him toward the kitchen. The backyard looked empty, quiet. He leaned in just a little, parting the blinds to peek through the glass door. Nothing. He was about to turn away when something moved. Not outside, not in the yard, but in the reflection on the glass. A shadow had passed behind him, fast and low, crossing the hallway just behind where he stood. Sean spun around so fast he nearly slipped on the tile. The hallway was empty, silent, but he knew. Something had just been there. He ran back to the basement, shook Tyler awake and tried to explain everything in whispers, trying not to lose it. Tyler sat up, eyes wide. They grabbed their phones and slipped into the closet in the corner of the basement, shutting the door and dialing 911. While they waited, they heard it. Footsteps, heavy ones, moving fast across the floor upstairs. Then lighter steps, like someone pacing, doors opening, closing. It was like whoever, or whatever, was up there was searching for something, or someone. Then just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It felt intentional, like the intruder knew they were being listened to. When the police arrived, they found the back door slightly ajar. The small bolt that usually secured it was busted clean off, like it had been forced with something heavy. Whoever had come in didn't break a window or trip an alarm. They just popped the bolt and walked right in. They never found the person. No fingerprints, no trace. Just the busted bolt and those same smudges on the glass. Like someone had stood there for a while, watching. Over the next few years, Sean told me it happened again. Every few months, they'd find fresh smudges, always on the same door, always the same shape. Someone standing there, hands on the glass, looking in. It wasn't until they finally installed a motion-activated camera that the visits stopped, at least as far as they know. Sean says he still dreams about that hallway, the soft yellow glow from the overhead bulb, the way the light looked stretched across the floor, and that moment where everything felt still, right before something moved behind him. No one ever figured out what that person wanted, but Sean's convinced of one thing. They weren't trying to break in. They were already inside.